there a little. And if we refuse to do that, then we're like that house that's built on the sand, and when a gust of wind comes, we're blown over. We are, laying on the side of the road somewhere, and people wonder why their lives are not, uh, you know, productive, fruitful, and pardon the phrase, in God. Well, there's a reason for that. It's kind of like, put it in a blunt term, if somebody says, don't eat rat poison, and you do, what's the result? You die. Okay. So it's important to understand that there is a process. And if you don't understand, well, let me rephrase that. If we will not follow the process, then we won't get the results. In Canada, they say process. They don't say process. They say process. And so the Lord, some time ago, years ago, actually 15, 20 years ago, said to me, process, you become a pro when you go through the cesspool of life. That's the process.
I don't think that was from the Lord.
Yeah. You don't know if that was from the Lord or not? Maybe it was my imagination. Huh? Like the Temptations saying, just my imagination. Yeah.
It's a good one, though.
So for those of you watching by live stream, I'm going to ask you to do something. I want every person watching on live stream to send me a comment with your name. Let me know that you're watching. And you can just say, hey, watching, this is Roy. Hey, watching, this is George. Hey, watching, this is Betsy. Whoever you are, just send me a little notification that you're watching. It's not for my ego. It's not for, my ratings. It's just that I would like to know that you're listening, and hopefully that you're learning and you're growing. Okay, let's get into the word here. So in the church world, for years we have, as Christians, we have accused people that were non-believers of being of the world. And Judy, we just kind of nonchalantly, or however, we just said, well, that's worldly. And what we meant by that, Heidi, was that everything that I disagree with in your life is worldly. It's kind of like the person that you ask and you say, well, what kind of work do you do? Oh, everything. Well, you just haven't told me anything, you know. And so also, in fact, this just came to me, Tommy. I was just thinking, we live in a godless society. You know what that means? That there's less of God. And so the term worldly is defined by your denominational upbringing, our concept of, we believe. I remember when I was with the Church of God from Cleveland, Tennessee, and this is not a slam on that denomination, but one of our distinctives was that we could not practice mixed bathing. And it's like, mixed bathing? What that meant was you weren't supposed to go swimming with the opposite sex, but they coined it mixed bathing, which is ridiculous. So we've created these systems, these rhythms that people are kind of in this confused state as to, oh, that's worldly, or that's godliness, or that's ungodly. And Donna, Sean, we don't explain what the heck that means. We just throw the words out there and we expect people to believe what I believe. Well, it's not that easy. As I said on Wednesday, and I may have to repeat this a couple times, but it's worth hearing, it's worth remembering, it's worth believing. You can't speak your way into a new way of acting. Like, I'm not going to cuss. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to cheat. You can't do that. It won't work, number one. But you can act your way into a new way of thinking. You can act. Ryo, good to see you. There's the Father following you. James, good to see you. But you can act your way into a new way of thinking. Why? Because when you act, eventually you start thinking what you're acting. As a man thinketh, so he is. One of the things we've heard that practice makes perfect. No, it doesn't. It makes consistent. Practice doesn't make perfect. It makes consistent. What's the C word here? Consistent. I will bet my life, Betty, all the years of my life, what I've lived and what I'm going to live going forward, that if a person is consistent, we will reap the benefits of that consistency. If we're not consistent, we will not reap anything but chaos and confusion and dismay and discouragement and disappointment and all these other things. And so it's important to me and to us as Christians that we understand that this is not kind of like you go to the carnival and you throw darts at a bunch of balloons and you hope that you hit enough so you win a prize. And that's kind of how Christians live. A majority of us, and not just Christians, but people that don't believe in God. They're like, I hope I hit that balloon and I hope I win something at the carnival. And it doesn't work that way. It's absurd for any person who wants to believe in God to believe this is kind of like, you flip the quarter, heads I win, tails I lose. It does not work that way. So what I want to talk to us about today is, what is the world? And given whoever we ask, yourself included, our definition is probably not going to be the biblical definition, because we just don't read the Bible enough to, and when I say we, I'm talking in a general sense. I'm not talking just about those of us here. But in the general sense, the majority of Christians, the only time they dust off their Bible is when they're coming to church on Sunday, but the rest of the week they don't pick it up. It's just, it's a good table book that sits on the coffee table. So I want you to go with me over to the book of James. We're going to read there just a little bit. I'm going to read some scriptures, then I'm going to share with us some thoughts. James chapter 4 and verse 4 says this, and it's pretty strong language. I should probably read it from the Amplified, because it really hits home. James chapter 4 and, well, let's read 4 and 5. It says this: you are like unfaithful wives. And I'm going to explain why it says wives instead of husbands. You are like unfaithful wives, having illicit love affairs with the world and breaking your marriage vow to God. Do you not know that being the world's friend is being God's enemy? So whoever chooses to be a friend of the world takes his stand as an enemy of God. So it uses the term wives because we are to be the bride of Christ. And a wife supposedly is supposed to trust her husband's provision and protection. And when a wife doesn't trust that, then she will trust something else. Now, the other side of the coin is that the man must provide that provision, security, emotional, financial, and that protection from deception, lies, and all the other things that come to the church, which is called a woman. So here James is elaborating, and he's saying, listen, he says, you're involved with illicit love affairs with the world, breaking your marriage vow. So one of the things that you and I have to understand, James, is that when we refuse to accept the provision of God, and we refuse to accept his protection, then we go off into another affair looking for that. That's the parallel. In First John, we read this a couple of weeks ago. First John and chapter 2, verses 15 through 17 says, "Do not love or cherish the world or the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him." So here it's kind of explaining to us that what we've done is that we're going in an affair with the world because we don't love the Father enough. It didn't say Jesus, didn't say the Holy Spirit, it said the Father. Now the Father represents discipline. The Father represents he's the boss. He's over it all. When people say, "Well, I just love Jesus," well, you're missing you're missing some stuff here. This is what happened to a huge church out in the South End. They had like 5,000 people. It's gone because they were a Jesus-only church. And so when people refuse discipline, natural or spiritual, then what happens is we go after an affair, and I'm not talking a sexual affair, but we go after an involvement with the world, and that becomes our illicit love affair. And then he goes on and he says, "For all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, craving for sensual gratification, the lust of the eyes, greedy longing of the mind, and the pride of life, assurance in one's own resources or in the stability of earthly things, these do not come from the Father, but are from the world." Those things don't come from the Father. And then he says this, "And the world passes away and disappears, and with it the forbidden cravings, the passionate desires, the lust of it. But he who does the will of God and carries out his purposes in his life, abides or remains forever." In that same book, 1 John chapter 5, and verses 4 and 5, says this, "For whatever is born of God is victorious over the world. And this is the victory that conquers the world, even our faith." Whatever is born of God overcomes the world. So, Penny, whatever God births in the church, Carol, will overcome the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It will overcome that. Either we believe that or we don't believe that. Either we're like, "Well, but you don't." Yeah, I do understand. You just don't want to believe. And then he goes on and he says this in verse 5, Who is it that is victorious over the world but he who believes?" Not only does we have to have faith, but Bill, we have to believe. "But he that believes that Jesus is the Son of God, who adheres to, trusts in, and relies on that fact." See, we're at a stage, I believe, in the world, in this age. There's a difference between the world and the age. The age is the time we're living in. This is the age we're living in. We are living in the age where the world system is just running downhill, ready to run into the pits of darkness deeper than you and I could ever imagine. And we're acting as if, though, we're just having another season and we're going to just, come out on the other side. And it's going to be all okay because I got plans. I've got plans for the next 20 years. Well, I got news for you. A day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day with him. And so, like Charlie used to say, he would just laugh and laugh. He'd say, "Just tell God your plans and he'll laugh." Kind of like, "Really? That's your plan?" Got news for you. Okay, so what is the world? In Genesis chapter 2, I'm not going to read all that. I'm just going to tell you what it says, just give you an idea. So they're in the Garden of Eden. And God has made provision for them. You can eat, you can lay down, take a nap. This is the provision I've made for you. And then he provided full protection for them. There was no enemy coming in to kill them or take over their house, whatever that is, steal their camel, take their car. And then he also gave them pleasure. They looked at that which God had created, and it says that it gave them pleasure. Somebody says, oh man, if I just had the perfect wife, if I just had the perfect husband, if I just had the perfect situation, if I just had, enough money, if I just had, this and this and this and this. Adam and Eve fell in a perfect state. In a perfect state. They had provision, they had protection, and they had pleasure. Oh, so what's missing? Well, here's what it was, is that God supplied all their needs. God was their life and their all. God provided all their needs, provision, protection, pleasure, everything that they needed. God provided for them. And they still could not stay on track with what God had created them for. So let's go to chapter 3 of Genesis. And there we find that Adam and Eve fell. They partook of the forbidden fruit, whatever you want to call it. But that really wasn't the sin. The sin was that they didn't believe what God said. God said, if you partake of this, you're going to die. They didn't believe that. That was the sin. He could have said, if you look out the window on the right side of the mountain, you're going to die. Doesn't matter what the deal was. The deal is that they didn't believe what God said. That's the sin. Everything else is the fruit of the root. The root is, I don't believe what God is saying. And we catch that all the time. Unbelievers, believers, Christians that are, I remember a guy came to me, this was back in the 70s. He'd been a Christian pastor for, I think back then he was in his 70s, so he was pretty old like me. And he came up to me at a camp meeting, Aldous, and he was visibly, DJ, he was visibly shaking, and he says, Brother Reuben, he says, I'm afraid. And I go, what? I'm looking at this guy that's, old enough to be my dad or maybe my grandfather, and I'm like, and I highly respected him, and I was like, this guy, he was from Missouri, he was a, preacher from there, stubborn as a mule, just preaching away, and I said, why are you afraid? He said, because I've been loaning money to small churches so that they could build their buildings and buy the equipment that they need, and I've been charging them interest. That's why you're afraid. You've been making money off of God's work. You should be afraid. I said, give it back. Give it back. I got a call from my pastor who's been dead for 10, 12 years, and him and his wife decided to have a civil war, and each one of them wanted the property that was worth probably $3 or $4 million, and I happened to be the voting member of the board, and they were calling me to vote with him, and then she called me to vote with her, and I said to both of them, I said, you know what you need to do? You need to sell this property and give that money back to everybody who gave you $1 to buy that property. You see, when man fell, he lost his provision, he lost his protection, and he lost the pleasure that only God could give him. In thy presence is the fullness of joy, the word says. So Here's man started his godless civilization. There was less of God in their lives than there was when they were in that perfect state. So when we talk about the world, we're talking about that tavern down the street or that head shop down on First Avenue or those prostitutes or that pimp or, all that garbage that Disney's putting out and all the filth that's out there in the media, all this stuff that society, that's just the fruit. That's the fruit of a godless civilization that has left the provision, the protection, and the pleasure that God had ordained for his creation. So let's go to Genesis chapter 4. You see, line upon line, precept upon precept, it just keeps building to each other. The story gets better and better and better. But first it gets worse and worse and worse. So in chapter 4, we find about Cain. He kills his brother Abel. Why? Because there's less of God. He has a great-great-grandson by the name of Lamech. And Lamech has 3 sons. The first one's name is Jabal. And Jabal, in chapter 4 there, talks about what he does, Tommy, is he makes tents and he's a cattle raiser. That's the provision. And then the second son is Jubal, and he's a crafter of the harp and the organ or the pipes, and that's the guy that brings the pleasure. And then we have Tubal, who is a forger of brass and iron, and he's the one that makes all the weapons. That's the protection. So all of a sudden, we have a civilization that is replacing the provision, the protection, and the pleasure that God had intended. And now man has a godless civilization where we are producing our own provision, our own protection, and our own pleasure. Because we are godless. We have less of God. So catch that point with me. You see, when I have less of God, I'm going to be producing what only God should be producing in my life. So when we say, man, that person out there is godless, I think I'd kind of rethink that, because we're making that assessment by what they're doing. It's like one guy, Joe remembers, and I'm sure Bill does, Grant Crawford. Grant called me up about 11:30 midnight one night. He said, I got to talk to you. I said, oh, okay. He says, well, I'm still awake. Come on down. No, you come to my office. And I said, okay. Where's your office? It's a tavern up on Highway 99. I said, I'll take me 10, 15 minutes. I'll be there. Could you imagine if some holy saint saw me walking in there? I don't care. They say, oh, that godless Reuben, he's going to the tavern again. No, I don't have less of God. I have more of God. That's why I'm going there. Because I have more of God than Grant had, and he needed to have more of God. I'm not going to advocate that all of you go tavern hopping tonight, but the point being is our definition of godless is wrong, Carter. Godless means you have less of God, and we need more of God. So civilization produced after man lost his position in the garden and left the provision and the protection and the pleasure that God had intended for man.
What did you use for the symbolism for Tubal? You had a statement.
Which one?
You had an allegory
Yeah.
for Tubal.
Tubal forged the brass and the iron, the weapons for protection.
You had a worldly example of that.
I have to listen to the tape. Once it's gone, Tommy, it's gone. So God, man left God and produced a godless life created by man. This godless life is now utilized and taken advantage of by Satan. these avenues of having protection, having provision, and having pleasure, Satan now comes to possess us with those and to control us by them. Man, here's how it works. Man disobeys God and forsakes God. Man falls into fear over his needs. I need a house to live in. I need food to eat. I need to be protected. That's why we get guns and we lock the doors. I need this. And so man creates a godless or less of God life. And Satan disguises himself in life through provision, protection, and pleasure. If God won't give it to me, I'll get it myself. If God won't supply it for me, I'll make it myself. Over the years, because people think I have the gift of gab, and they think everybody believes everything I say, multi-level marketing has always been, oh, Reuben, yeah, man, just buy a boatload of stuff and you can sign up people and just think of all the money you can make for Jesus. Oh, and by the way, I get some commission too. Okay. And then Satan organizes man's provision, protection, and pleasure into a system which is called the world system. It is now formed without God because it is godless, or we have less of God. Oh, it's an honest trap. Are you against me making money and having a house and having money to buy food and watching movies and going skating? And no, I'm not against any of that. But if there's less of God, then it's godless. See, man had the perfect world. He had the provision that God had for him, and he had the protection of God, and he had the pleasure. It pleased him to see what God had given him to rule over and to name all the animals. What's that big fat thing? Oh, that's a hippopotamus. Where'd you get that? I don't know. Just came out. And that other big thing over there, that's an elephant. But when man fell, man had to start creating his own world. And Lamech's sons, one with the tent and the cattle, and the other one with the music, and the other one with the weapons. Stop and think about it with me for just a moment. What are the basic needs of humanity? Pleasure, food and provision, protection. You see all the ads, put all your money in gold because it's not going to be worth anything. Everybody's scrambling around, got to put their money in gold, and, put your money over here. And because you got to make sure that you have enough to retire on. And, $38 million is not enough. So Satan disguises himself in this thing called a godless civilization. And you and I bite into it because we have less of God than we should have. Sometimes I say to people, if you have nothing, boy, you're rich, because you don't have to worry about losing anything. If you got all this stuff you got to worry about, everything is going to be taken away from me. The system, the world, keeps telling us you need to stock up on food because there's coming a shortage, and you need to have a 50 caliber machine gun. You need 5 pit bull dogs and a tank and grenades and a bomb shelter. And it's like, man, leave me alone. Just put me to death right now, because that's just too tiring. One of these days we'll show. We have a DVD of this Russian Christians, and how this missionary went into Russia, and they show the beating of a Russian pastor, and they took him, put his wife somewhere, and anyway, the climax of it was that they were taking him out of the cell. And all of a sudden, all the prisoners in that prison started singing a Christian song. And I'm getting goosebumps as I'm telling you about it, because all of a sudden, and he just looked up, and the guards were just like, what's going on? What was going on was God's life began to flow into those men. And they were basically saying to those soldiers and to the Russian government, you go ahead and kill me. Do what you want to do, but I'm going to worship the Lord. He's my protection. He's my provision. He's my pleasure. I don't care what you do. Are we living by the world's system, which is God-less, or having less of God? That's what's happening in the United States of America. They're just trying to squeeze God out of every corner, get him out of every place, every law, every school, every courthouse, and eventually they're going to march into the churches and say, you can't say that. And we're going to say, oh, yes, we can. Oh, yes, we will. Just watch me. But you see, if you and I don't have more of God, then we're going to have God less. If we try to provide for our own provision and our own protection and our own pleasure. And that's the whole idea of the system. The world consists of everything, and this you got, if you don't get anything else, get this with me. The world consists of everything that replaces God and all that usurps. Now, let me give us the definition, Sean, of usurps. The Latin, surely, of it means this: seize for use. So, Caleb, the world usurps or seizes our lives for its own use. The Old French definition is appropriate a right wrongfully. Take a person's right and appropriate it wrongfully. For instance, I think in Europe now they've legalized prostitution. So you have a right. It's kind of like when I got pulled over at Jane. Actually, I didn't get pulled over. I pulled into her driveway, and the motorcycle cop was behind me, and no light, nothing. He gave me a ticket for not having a seatbelt on. I said, of course I don't have a seatbelt on. I'm getting out of the car. So I go to court, and the judge threw it out because I basically said, I don't have a right to be wrong, but I have a right to be respected. So what he's saying here in the Old French is appropriating a right, but in a wrong way. I have a right to live, but I don't have a right to live wrong. I'm usurping God's plan. I'm usurping God's authority. I'm usurping what God created me for. I'm saying, you just manage, heaven and eternity. I'll take care of time down here. God says, but you don't understand, Reuben. The civilization you're living in, it's something that man has created, and it is now being usurped by Satan. The word usurp means to take a position of power or importance. Satan usurps his agenda, and he takes the power or the importance of my life, and he uses it for his purpose. Do you know what Satan's purpose is? Satan doesn't care if he kills me. What he really wants to do is he wants to get back at God. Satan really wants to get back at God. And how do you get back at a parent? Just mess with his kids. Kill his kids, torture his kids, maim his kids, destroy his children. See, you're the object. You and I are the object of Satan. He loves destroying humanity and shaking his finger in the Father's face. Look what I'm doing to your kids. And God says, you just wait till I get to you. Because hell was created for Satan and his angels, Not for you, not for me, not for George out there or Betty out there, but created for Satan and his angels. And so Satan usurps. The world consists of everything that replaces God, that replaces God, that replaces God. God, you're not providing for me, so I'm going to provide for myself. God, you're not protecting me, so I'm going to protect myself. God, you're not giving me enough pleasure, so I'm going to get my own pleasure. And so Satan takes advantage of that, and he usurps, takes position of power, illegally or by force. Illegally or by force. I'm going to close chapter 5. We're introduced into Enoch. And son, Enoch's name means dedicated. So, Betty, the way that we get back into, Judy, the line we're supposed to be, where we allow God to be our provision, be our protection, be our pleasure, is we dedicate our lives to him. It says Enoch walked with God and was not. He just kept walking, and Karina, he just disappeared. There was no more of Enoch. So, Bill, we are dedicated to the Lord, and after a while, people don't see us, Howie. They just see God. Like, what happened to Reuben? He got weird and got religious. Something happened. He's not into what he was into before. I mean, Cheryl 2.0, he's no longer with us. It's like when I was in that storefront church and they were singing Victory in Jesus, and I was crying my eyes out, and my buddies, they were all going to an X-rated movie. We're all going to get high, and they were like, Reuben, get out of there! Reuben, get out of there! I was captured by the presence of God, and they literally came down the aisle. I was at the front row. We were singing Victory in Jesus, and they literally walked down that aisle, grabbed me, and pulled me out. I should have shot him. God said, I got time. I'll get him down the road. Like the police officer leaving our house. He said, Reuben, do you want to go with me now, or should I come back and get you later? I ran away from home that day. So then we get to Genesis chapter 6. You read these chapters when you get home. And that's the story of Noah. Noah means rest. Noah was building a boat, and people were walking by, and they were saying, what in the world are you doing, Noah? He said, I'm building a boat. He goes, what is a boat? He says, well, it's this thing that floats on water. What are you talking about, water? Because back before that, they had the sprinkler system that the dew and the mist would, water the earth, and they didn't know about rain. And Noah said, there's rain come. What is rain? Oh, you'll find out sooner or later. Yeah, it's coming, and where are the scoffers in the last day about this thing called Jesus, and the earth being purified by fire, and people's lives being purified, not only washed, but purified by the purging fire of the Spirit of God. And he said, it's coming. Oh, you're full of beans. No, you ate too much pizza last night. You're crazy. And then it started raining, and all of a sudden the water began to rise and rise and rise, Carter. And all of a sudden, all these people that were providing for themselves, protecting themselves, and having pleasure, as it says in the New Testament, as it was in the days of Noah, they were eating, drinking, and giving in marriage. And then suddenly, oh my God, this godless civilization was wiped off the map. Why? Because they had less of God. We are in dire straits in America. The Christian church is not being the church it's supposed to be. I'm not here smacking us around. I'm just here telling us the truth. We can't speak our way into a new way of acting. But we can act our way into a new way of thinking. The Bible says in chapter 6, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Our prayer should be, if we are godless, if we have less of God, God, help us to understand how to have more of you. As I said last week, we need to enlarge our fellowship with God by inviting him into areas of our life that we've kept him out. Have you kept him out of your life, your financial life? Have you kept him out of your mental life? Have you kept him out of your sexual life? Have you kept him out of your emotional life? Have you kept him out of your physical life? Have you kept him out? Where have we kept him out of? Well, and I want to say this to you young people. You know, when I think first time I ran away, what was it? 3 years old, Patsy? Joe was 4. Joe was following in my footsteps. I helped him pack and set him down the road. That's true. I said, here's your suitcase, son. Just get on with it. He came back about 20 minutes later.
Did you make him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for the road?
Yeah, he had a sandwich, all right. So you young people, I'm not going to expect you to live like I live. I'm just going to expect you to grow at the pace that you have the capacity to grow. And then when that capacity is filled, we're going to stretch you a little bit more and fill you with some more. You can't overload somebody and put more in them than they're able to contain. God will never ask you to do more than he can give you the power to do. That's called frustrating the grace of God in an individual. You might say, I can't do that, Pastor. I know you can't. I can't either. But I have a God. I have a God who makes provision and protection and pleasure and shows me how to live in all those 3 areas, not by replacing him, but allowing him to be God in my life in all those areas. And then last of all, as I said last week, we need to deepen our fellowship. If I only spend 20 minutes a week with the Lord, I should probably stretch it out to 25 a week. And then maybe a half hour a week, and then maybe an hour a week. And before you know it, man, Cheryl, I've stretched it out, Trudy, to, every day. I can hardly wait to get in the Word. I can hardly wait to. I listen to music and sermons all day long when I'm driving. I'm feeding myself. I've had church already for like 5 hours so far this morning. And I'm not telling you have to be like me. I'm just saying that I'm feeding myself because I'm living in a world that is godless. We're living in a world that is full of wickedness and it's evil and it's dark and it's going straight to hell. Oh, did you use that word? Yeah, I used that word. So what is the world? The world is that system that man has used to replace God, and Satan has usurped what God has created us for. And he has come into the system to get us to trust in our own provision, our own protection, and our own pleasure, rather than letting God provide that which he had purposed and planned before the world began. Let's pray. Father, there is a clarion call. There's a clarion call today to the body of Christ we have less of God, not because I say so, but because the evidence has found us guilty. We are supposed to be the light and the salt. We neither have preserving power nor the enlightening power. And I'm speaking in a general sense today, Lord. Anyone who hears my voice this morning, whether we're sitting here or through YouTube or down the road, will hear not a condemning message, but a challenging message. The hour is late, night cometh, and no man can work. And you love every person here and everyone that's listening this morning. You love every person. And you've proven it by sacrificing your son. Lord, I just, my prayer today is, as I said to several guys this morning at the club, what are you doing? What are you doing? If the world has me, and I'm trusting in the world's concept of provision and protection and pleasure, then I've replaced you, Lord, with the world. And your word says that if I love the world, it's like a woman, a wife who's having an illicit affair with lovers. So I've left my love for you. I'm having a love affair with the world. Father, we need you. We need you. Say it with me, church. We need you. May you come and raise our spirits to meet you. I know some believe in the rapture, and that's whatever a person wants to believe. Lord, I want to believe that you want to raise my spirit to meet you right now. I want to be raised in heavenly places with you right now, so that, Lord, I can be seated with you and hear your heartbeat and look upon the earth and its need. Look upon the world, so that when we speak Christ, when we proclaim Christ, it's not some historical figure, it's not some religious icon, but it is you in power, in glory, in the express image and brightness, that it would change our atmosphere, our dwelling place, our thinking, our living. As we enter into a time of worship, Lord, I just ask that every heart here be surrendered to you, and that we would allow you to purge, purify, cleanse us from the impurities that would hinder your living in us and through us and to us. We want to glorify you. We want to glorify you.